We are a group of young people who volunteer with Station House Media Unit, producing and presenting radio as well as making films and live television programmes. Before we made this film, the only experience we had of war was through our games controllers in our bedrooms or from scenes in our favourite films. We are now at an age that if it was between 1939 and 1945, we would have been called up to serve our country. This made us wonder what it was really like to be involved in the war, from being a child in the Anderson shelters to a doctor helping the wounded or a soldier on the front lines. So we made it our mission to speak to the people who were really there to find out what it was like to defend and fight for our country. These are their stories.
Well, I was brought up in the 30s. Large family, 3 brothers, 3 sisters. My father had died in 1928, so it was really hard at that time. Money was scarce.
It was just a normal upbringing. Went to school, took part in sports, did as Mum and Dad told me.
At the age of 12, we all got paper jobs or small jobs, doing 6 a week, until I left school at 13, started work at 14. Christmas, the school broke up, so I was 14 on the 7th of January, so I didn't go back to school, but I found a job, and whenever I was 14, started work. And I worked until I was 81. Never idle in my life. Which I wanted to be a joiner, but wages was very poor. I think it was 9 shillings a week and 6 off for your stamp. And my mother said we just couldn't afford that, so I didn't get an apprenticeship. I went to work in the Granham Mills.
I wanted to be a radiographer, and I was never hearing any word that I was being accepted. So therefore I volunteered for the Wrens, and I got accepted for both on the same post. So I decided to go to the Wrens because I'd have a bit of adventure, and I could go back and study when I came out of the Wrens. I never did because I didn't go back to study.
I am speaking to you from the Cabinet Room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany. And now that we have resolved to finish it, I know that you will all play your part with calmness and courage.
I thought it was so exciting, you know. But my grandmother was crying, I remember that. And I wondered why. But of course my cousin was called up right away. My stepfather had been in the First World War and was very badly burned by mustard gas. And seemingly he was told that if he hadn't been such a strong Aberdeenshire farm servant, he would have probably died.
On the 3rd of September 1939, it was a Sunday, I was in church. I was 10 years old. I was a choir boy. And the 11 o'clock service started with the minister saying that the Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, was going on the radio at 11 o'clock. He would report to the congregation what this speech was about. So the service started about 11:15. A man came in at the far end of the church waving a piece of paper, and the minister stopped the service and got into the pulpit and read the paper which said war was declared. So he then said a prayer. I don't know if we sang the last hymn, but he drew the service to a close, and we all trooped out about 11:30. wondering what was going to happen next.
We thought the war would be over by the time we were ready for army service. And then I was called up then. That was 1st of March 1943, just an ordinary infantryman.
I drove 3 and 5 ton Commers. Went down to London, to New College in Finchley Road, and we were there for, I think it was about 8 weeks, I can't remember. And from there, I got posted to Northern Ireland, to Fleet Air Base at Eglinton, which was 9 miles out of Londonderry.
6 weeks training at the Bridge of Dawn, then 8 weeks at the Jute Works, where Sunnybank School was our kitchen and dining room, and then we were in the Jute Work buildings. We were there when the big air raid was in Aberdeen, and one of our platoon was killed in Fraser Place. His body wasn't found until the following morning. And the barrack room that we moved out of, the B block in the Bridge of Dawn, that's the one we moved out of to go to the Jute Works. And a new intake came in the Monday, and then the big air raid was a few days later, and 12 of these soldiers were killed in the barrack room that I was in. So it was my first escape, really. And then up to the Orkney Islands. And then we came down from the Orkneys about June, May, June, and joined the 227 Brigade, 15 Scottish. That's when we started. Then that's when we became Gordon Highlanders, when we landed up at the Orkneys. Oh, the training was quite easy. I mean, 18, you're fit, you could run for miles, no problem with the training. We really enjoyed it. You went away for maybe a whole week on an exercise, and you slept rough, under hedges or in barns, anywhere where you could get your head down. I mean, at 18 years old, and you're fit. I mean, you don't get into the infantry unless you're fit, believe me. So, I mean, it was a 10-mile forced march with full platoon weapons, which includes 3 Bren guns, a Piat anti-tank gun, a 2-inch mortar. Now, you all take turns of carrying that, and you've got to do this run within so many minutes. 10 miles you do. Now, at the end of that, most of us could have run another 10. It was easy.
And my first memories of war activities was my father distributing gas masks to all the houses in our street. And that was about 1938, I think.
So it used to go up to the pleasure park because there was the swings and the shoot and so forth, and we just enjoyed it. And then, as I said, all of a sudden there was this massive firing, and it was a Spitfire chasing this German plane. And the bullets were landing all over the park. And I don't know why we were not, but anyhow, I went rushing down home. And then we heard later that the Spitfire had crashed in Benihee.
Just on the other side, just outside the hospital, there was the cooperative place in Berrydale Road. And in the Coopy milk department, they had this huge tower which looked very, very much like a German flak tower. And this had great interest with any of the raiding aircraft during at night or during the day, and they would machine gun the actual tower. And there was also in Westbourne Road a large block of, it was like a block of flats, and they thought this possibly was the barracks, and it got machine gunned quite a bit as well too.
My father was an air raid precaution warden, and he was out every night. He'd lost an awful lot of sleep. I don't know how he managed to continue at work. But he would come in and tell us from time to time what was happening outside. And from time to time we heard bombs falling, nothing within about 2 miles, but you could certainly hear them screeching down. Our neighbour was a very nervous woman who screamed whenever she heard a bomb and flung herself over her little girl. I thought it was quite exciting, and my mother just gritted her teeth and said nothing.
As soon as the alarm went, we would go in and huddle down in the Anderson shelter until we got the all clear. That was sirens, different sirens and so forth. And it was during that night, I can't remember the actual time at night, but all of a sudden the siren went, and there was quite a number of explosions we could hear all around the city. And my father, he had came down to make sure we were okay, and on his way from the shelter and his way back up to the hospital, this aircraft would have let its bombs go, and one of them, probably a 500 kilo bomb, would have exploded just outside the bottom of our garden near what was a bowling green there in the hospital, which is about 75 yards from the Anderson shelter and the back of the house. The bomb my father would have thrown himself to the ground. The main shock would have gone over the top of him, and the part of the bomb, which was probably about that amount by that thick, this was part of the casing. It actually went through my bedroom window, and you'll see it in the photograph, and landed in my bed, which then burnt a hole through the mattress and so forth. At this time, we'd heard the noise. It was quite loud, and we were all huddled underneath the forms in the tiny little shelter. And then later, when we got out, you could smell the explosive from the bomb, and of course there was all hell was let loose. There was a lot of machine gun fire as well too. Probably as they bombed the hospital, several patients were killed, members of staff. Of course, they had machine gunned the front of the house, and my mother and father had always used to put a mattress up against their window. Used to look out onto Westbourne Road, and occasionally when they did machine gun what they thought was the barracks, you'd get the odd machine gun bullets going straight through into the mattress and so forth.
We landed in Normandy 8 days after D-Day. Moved up, never got our feet wet, by the way. We were in a big liner, and it stayed out in the channel. And we went over the side, down scramble nets, into landing craft infantry. And they took us to the Mulberry Harbour. We went up the scramble nets, onto the Mulberry Harbour, and ran along, and we just stepped onto the sand. Never got our feet wet. So we moved in. Of course, the bridgehead was about 8-10 miles wide at that time. So we moved up to St. Gabriel in Normandy, and we stayed there until the 25th. And then we moved up close to the front line. And to move up, not marching, because a whole battalion of marching men, you would hear that for long distance. So we walked single file, grass verges, up to the front line, no shouting, no noise, and we went in below hedges, and we had to lie there. We got fed. Next morning, Rivali, 5 o'clock, washed, shaved, a church service, and then at 7 o'clock, the barrage opened up. Now, with 900 guns behind us firing, and out in the English Channel with 4 battleships firing 16-inch guns over our heads. They could fire for 22 miles, maybe longer than that. So that was the barrage started, and we moved up close behind. If safety would allow, and then the barrage would stop, and it would lift and go further. That's how you went into action. I remember it as clear as it was yesterday. We moved up the front line through the village of Chaux. It's C-H-E-U-X, in Normandy, and that was our first really action, and it was terrifying in that village. There was burning tanks, German and British, dead bodies, German and British, snipers going. That's the first time that fear started to come into it. Up till then, you never felt, you were quite keen to get there. They were a resolute army, the Germans. You've got to give them credit for that. They really defended well and fought well. It's a terrifying experience being under a mortar attack. And when you're being shelled or mortared, as long as you were below ground, you were quite safe. And as the sergeant said, if you get a direct hit in your trench, you won't know anything about it.
My parents, my dad in particular, used to go down into town if he saw service people wandering around on a Sunday morning, sometimes even in the rain. They'd nowhere else to go. So we'd pick them up and take them home. And they were welcomed into the family and they were fed and what have you. And we used to clear the dining room. And although they were in hobnailed boots many of the times, we used to dance on the carpet. And the radiogram would be in the corner. And eventually, most of them were the Gordon Highlanders that came, and they would buy their own records.
But I felt sorry for the English lads getting out on a Saturday night, and it was a blackout, and they were strangers in Aberdeen. And of course, us knowing Aberdeen, we showed them around. And that's when I palled around with these two lads, one from York, one from Birmingham. And we were all 19-year-old, well, 18 at that time. But both of these two were killed when they were 19. That's men you trained with for a year. You slept in the same barrack room for a year. You sat at the same dining table for a year. You went out at night to the pictures or out for a drink with the same men. It's like a family. And then you see them going down and you're not allowed to help. You see the films where an American soldier gets hit and half a dozen of his friends are all around him and helping him. Court-martial offence if we do that. Stretcher bearers, it's their job to pick them up. So there was a man you were out drinking with and he's lying there, an arm hanging off or something, and you can't do a thing about it. It does nothing for your morale, I'm telling you. That John Andrews from York and Len from Birmingham, and they were both killed together with the same mortar bomb. Yeah. That was the 30th of June in the River Odin. When the bomb went off, I felt the blast and I thought they were behind me because somebody shouted, "There's trenches here," and was running across this road for the trenches. But this mortar bomb landed and John apparently, he wasn't killed then. I think he was taken away and died later. But Len was killed there, shrapnel to the head. So, he'd been running, you see, when that thing went off. I managed to get into a trench and another two, which I thought was Len and John, but it was Corrigan from Glasgow, Robert Close. It was Rab Close, we called him. He came from Falkirk. They were in beside us in that trench. And that's a barrage. It lasted about 20 minutes. A lot of casualties that day. I was wounded in Normandy.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, I don't suppose you ever heard people talk about the Nebelwerfers. Well, it's electrically fired rockets, as opposed to ordinary mortar bombs, which you hear coming whistling down, exploding. This Nebelwerfers, they go up. It's when they start to come down, the tail fin is designed like a Stuka dive bomber. A high-pitched scream it really affects your ears now. It really terrifies you. And these 6 at a time, now you lie there and you count to 6, and as soon as the last one exploded, your platoon commander shouting, "Forward!" And I got up to run forward when there was an explosion just to my left. So I went down again. Now I didn't feel anything. So up again, and I didn't have my rifle. So I bent down to pick it up. Blood was running down there. So I saw a stretcher bearer and got out my, and I did a big pocket here. He carried a field dressing, a shell dressing it was called. He got that out and he wrapped me up and he said, "Report to the casualty." Now at that time, there was no hospitals in France. So casualty clearance station, penicillin injection and a tag put on you, down to the beach and on a boat. It was home to England. I was walking, I've still got my shrapnel here, look, there. And I was only 10 days in the hospital, got back 7 days leave. And then down to Edinburgh, kitted out. Yeah. 1 day at Aldershot. And there was 42 of us, Highland troops, all regiments, going back with a Lance Corporal in charge. And when I arrived at Dover, there was only 31. 11 had gone AWOL. So they were picked up by the military police in the next few days and sent back to their units, court-martialed for desertion. Yeah. And they thought, well, maybe they won't send me back again, but they did. Yeah. And when we got to Aldershot, we were told we didn't know what was going on, you see. They don't tell you anything in the army, you only obey orders. So they said, report to the paymaster and get 10 shillings, go out, enjoy yourself, get drunk as you can, because you'll be in the front line in 2 days' time. A soldier with his Bren gun, you know, it's a machine gun, threw it into our trench and it split my toe here. No, I didn't think anything about it. No, at that time, you didn't take off your boots at night. So it was 3-4 days before I took off my boots when we came out. And this toe was, the nail was split. So, and it was beginning to fester. So I reported sick, and the MO, Captain McPhail, an injection, and he got scissors, and he cut down the middle of the nail, cut this bit out, bandaged me up. I couldn't get my boot on. So I got one Wellington, so I had my army boot and a Wellington, and this was in the front line. Mine. So when I went back, the officer said, "What happened to you?" And I told him, well, he said, "You're no use like that in the front line." So I was sent back to divisional headquarters until this foot healed up. Now that was January 1945. Now, then the big battle started. We crossed into Germany, and the war went so quick after that. And I was on guard this day. Up the road comes this 3 German transports. And it's like a motorcycle where 2 officers sit in the back facing backwards. High-ranking German officers. So I had to halt them, called for one of our own officers, and this was the commander of the German forces in our area came to surrender.
Yesterday morning at 2:41 a.m. at General Eisenhower's headquarters, General Jodl, the representative of the German High Command, and of Grand Admiral Dönitz, the designated head of the German state, signed the act of unconditional surrender of all German land, sea, and air forces in Europe to the Allied Expeditionary Force and simultaneously to the Soviet High Command. We may allow ourselves a brief period of rejoicing. But let us not forget for a moment the toils and efforts that lie ahead. Japan, with all her treachery and greed, remains unsubdued. The injuries she has inflicted upon Great Britain, the United States, and other countries, and her detestable cruelties call for justice and retribution. We must now devote all our strength and resources to the completion of our tasks, both at home and abroad. Advance, Britannia! Long live the cause of freedom! God save the King!
The end of the war was anticipated for 2 or 3 days, but when the final news came through, it was everybody was very cheerful, and there was a public dance set up in Kelvin Grove Park beside the museum.
Yeah, I mean, at the very beginning it was, you know, excitement, killing Germans and stuff like that. But after a few deaths of people you knew, it began to change. Delighted the war has finished.
I reported to the headquarters, and I was told there was no room for me in the Wrenery, which was the Wren's accommodation. And they would put me into digs. And I said, well, I could go home. So I went home. And they forgot about me. They just left me there. So I just used that as a base and did my work from there. Again, driving lorries, so I was quite happy.
Went back to this job, which I left, was just in a warehouse, food warehouse. And then, of course, I knew fine that when the 6 months was up, I'd be out. So I found this job a Goodyear Tire. I stayed there for 19 years. Nobody wanted to know us, do you know that? Nobody wanted to know what you had done or anything. And then that's when we were told, go out and tell them what you did, what you went through.